You think seniors living alone just heated up canned soup and called it dinner? Think again. Generations of elderly widows and widowers developed ingenious cooking methods that stretched every penny and ingredient to the limit. Let's dig into 30 genius cooking tricks for seniors living alone that have disappeared. One-pot cooking on wood stoves was a survival strategy that seniors perfected long before modern slow cookers existed. Elderly widows understood that managing multiple pots on temperamental wood stoves wasted precious fuel and required constant attention. Instead, they layered ingredients in a single heavy pot, dense root vegetables at the bottom where heat concentrated, meat in the middle, quick-cooking greens on top. The pot sat at the back of the stove, simmering all afternoon while they rested. This method stretched small amounts of meat across entire weeks while keeping kitchens warm during winter. The flavors melded together in ways modern separated cooking cannot replicate. For seniors counting every piece of coal or stick of firewood, one-pot cooking wasn't just convenient, it was essential to stretching fixed incomes through harsh winters when heating and eating competed for the same limited resources. Bread heel stockpots transformed what most people discarded into the foundation of countless meals for elderly cooks living alone. Every bread heel, every stale crust was saved in cloth bags hung near warm stoves where they continued drying without molding. When enough accumulated, seniors simmered them with vegetable scraps and bones into thick, nutritious bases that became soup, gravy, or bread pudding. This wasn't poverty cooking. It was wisdom from generations who understood waste was the enemy of survival. The bread absorbed flavors and released starches that thickened broths naturally without expensive cream. Seniors living alone had no one to share large loaves with, meaning bread went stale faster. Rather than watching money grow mold, these clever cooks developed systems turning inevitable staleness into culinary advantage, creating meals that tasted intentional rather than desperate. Egg water fertilizer recycling was a trick elderly gardeners used to stretch both breakfast ingredients and garden productivity simultaneously. After boiling eggs, seniors saved the calcium-rich cooking water and let it cool before pouring it around tomato plants and peppers. The water contained minerals leached from eggshells that prevented blossom end rot and strengthened plant cell walls. This closed-loop system meant breakfast contributed directly to dinner months later. Elderly gardeners living alone often struggled to maintain large plots, so maximizing every resource mattered enormously. The egg water trick required no additional expense, no trips to garden centers, no heavy fertilizer bags to wrestle. It was invisible efficiency producing visible results in stronger plants and better harvests, connecting the kitchen sink directly to next season's food supply in ways modern seniors have completely forgotten. Bacon grease canister systems turned breakfast byproduct into the most versatile cooking ingredient in elderly kitchens. A dedicated container sat permanently on the back of the stove, receiving rendered fat from every strip of bacon cooked throughout the week. This grease became primary cooking fat for everything: frying eggs, seasoning vegetables, making gravy. Seniors understood that buying separate oils and fats was wasteful when breakfast already provided perfectly good cooking medium. The grease imparted subtle smokiness while eliminating need for multiple expensive pantry items. For elderly widows who once cooked for large families, adjusting to small portions meant bacon lasted longer, and grease accumulated steadily enough to eliminate separate fat purchases entirely. The canister represented accumulated value, visible wealth measured in tablespoons of pure flavor waiting to transform simple ingredients into satisfying meals. Thermos cooking allowed elderly cooks to prepare hot meals without standing over dangerous stoves or running expensive burners for hours. The technique involved bringing ingredients to a boil, then immediately transferring everything into preheated wide-mouth thermos containers where retained heat continued cooking. Oatmeal prepared at bedtime emerged perfectly cooked by morning. Tough bean soups started after breakfast finished themselves by dinner time. For seniors with arthritis, memory concerns, or simple exhaustion, thermos cooking eliminated dangers of forgotten burners and physical demands of stirring for extended periods. The method saved enormous fuel amounts during eras when heating costs consumed significant portions of fixed incomes. Seniors discovered many dishes actually tasted better when cooked this gentle, slow way, as flavors developed without harsh temperatures that could toughen proteins or burn sugars. Windowsill refrigeration extended food preservation for seniors who lacked electric refrigerators or couldn't afford running them constantly. During cold months, a shelf installed outside kitchen windows became natural cold storage where butter stayed firm, milk remained fresh, and leftovers kept safely for days. Elderly cooks positioned these shelves on north sides where sun never warmed them, many installing small wooden boxes with screen ventilation keeping pests away while allowing cold air circulation. This technique saved substantial electricity during winter when heating bills already strained budgets. Seniors in older homes without modern refrigerators relied entirely on this method, timing shopping to cooler seasons and cooking to accommodate natural refrigeration. The windowsill shelf represented independence. Proof seniors could feed themselves safely without expensive appliances or help from family members who worried constantly. Potato water starch collection gave elderly cooks free thickening agent for gravies, soups, and pie fillings that modern kitchens simply pour down drains without thinking twice. After boiling potatoes for mashing or salads, seniors saved the cloudy cooking liquid in glass jars, letting it settle overnight until starch separated to the bottom as a dense white layer. This starch was carefully spooned out and dried on plates near warm stoves, creating powder that performed identically to expensive cornstarch from grocery stores. For seniors baking pies, making gravy, or thickening soups on fixed incomes, this free ingredient made significant differences in monthly food budgets. The technique required no special equipment, just patience and wisdom to recognize value where others saw waste. Elderly widows who stretched Depression-era budgets remembered this trick decades later, passing knowledge to anyone willing to learn the old ways. Haybox cooking was an insulation method seniors used to finish slow-cooked dishes without consuming any additional fuel after initial heating on the stovetop. A wooden box lined with hay, old blankets, or crumpled newspapers held covered pots of just boiled stew or beans, maintaining temperatures high enough to continue cooking for several hours without supervision. Seniors started dishes on the stove each morning, brought them to full boil, then transferred everything to hay boxes before leaving for church, medical appointments, or afternoon rest. When they returned hours later, dinner had finished itself using only heat already paid for during that initial boiling. This technique stretched fuel budgets enormously during eras when coal, wood, or gas represented significant monthly expenses for elderly people surviving on fixed incomes. The Haybox also eliminated fire hazards from unattended stoves, crucial safety for seniors living alone. Citrus peel preservation systems transformed garbage into valuable flavoring that elevated simple dishes without additional cost. Elderly cooks saved every orange peel, lemon rind, and grapefruit skin, drying them on warming ovens or windowsills until completely desiccated. These dried peels were stored in jars, ready to be grated into baked goods, simmered into teas, or added to stews for brightness fresh citrus couldn't provide when out of season or too expensive. For seniors who received oranges as rare holiday gifts, the peels represented weeks of additional flavoring long after fruit was eaten. The drying process concentrated essential oils while preventing spoilage, creating shelf-stable ingredients from what visitors considered garbage. This preservation mentality, seeing value in every component of purchased food, defined elderly cooking during eras when discarding edible material felt genuinely wasteful. Coffee grounds. Gardening applications stretched breakfast investments into vegetable production for elderly gardeners maintaining small plots. Used grounds were spread around acid-loving plants like blueberries and azaleas, worked into compost piles as nitrogen-rich amendments, and sprinkled around plant bases to deter slugs. For seniors drinking coffee daily, this created continuous garden fertilizer costing nothing additional. The grounds improved soil structure, attracted beneficial earthworms, and provided slow-release nutrients that expensive commercial fertilizers couldn't match for value. Elderly gardeners understood self-sufficiency required connecting every household activity to food production whenever possible. The coffee grounds trick required minimal effort, simply collecting and distributing material otherwise filling trash cans. while providing genuine benefits, reducing fertilizer purchases and improving harvests for seniors growing significant portions of their own food. Meat extender techniques allowed elderly cooks to stretch small portions of expensive protein across multiple meals without anyone feeling deprived. Breadcrumbs, oatmeal, or cooked rice were mixed into ground meat before forming patties or meatballs, nearly doubling the volume while adding texture that absorbed gravies and sauces beautifully. Seniors living alone often found that standard meat packages were too large for single servings, so extending what they bought meant fewer shopping trips and less waste from spoilage. The extenders also made meat more tender and helped it retain moisture during cooking, genuine improvements rather than compromises. For elderly widows who remembered Depression-era cooking, these techniques felt natural rather than desperate. The extended meat tasted complete, satisfying, and intentional. Modern cooks who skip this step waste both money and opportunity to create superior texture in their dishes. Vegetable-top soup stocks turned carrot greens, celery leaves, onion skins, and other trimmings into flavorful cooking liquid that cost absolutely nothing. Elderly cooks kept dedicated containers in their ice boxes or cool pantries, adding vegetable scraps throughout the week until enough accumulated for a proper stock. These trimmings simmered with water, and a few peppercorns created bases for soups, gravies, and rice dishes that commercial bouillon cubes couldn't match for depth or nutrition. For seniors cooking small portions, the stock method meant no vegetable was ever truly waste. Even the parts most people threw away contributed to future meals. The technique required minimal active work, just the habit of saving rather than discarding. Elderly cooks understood that flavor accumulated invisibly in these scrap pots, transforming simple ingredients into something that tasted of care and attention rather than poverty or limitation. Oven heat recycling captured warmth from baking to accomplish multiple tasks simultaneously, maximizing fuel efficiency for seniors on fixed incomes. After removing a casserole or roast, elderly cooks would slide in items needing gentle heat: bread dough for rising, wet shoes for drying, or jars of fruit for passive pasteurization. The residual heat cost nothing additional yet accomplished work that would otherwise require separate fuel expenditure. Some seniors scheduled their baking strategically, timing bread to enter the oven just as dinner emerged, using the declining heat curve perfectly. Others dried herbs, warmed plates, or even heated stones wrapped in cloth for cold beds. This mentality of extracting every bit of value from paid-for fuel defined elderly cooking wisdom. Modern ovens with automatic shutoffs and safety features have eliminated this practice entirely, along with the savings it provided. Sourdough starter maintenance gave elderly bakers perpetual leavening that never required purchasing yeast, a significant ongoing expense for those who baked regularly. A small crock of starter lived on kitchen counters or in cool pantries, fed weekly with flour and water, producing enough active culture for bread, pancakes, and biscuits indefinitely. Seniors understood that this living ingredient connected them to baking traditions stretching back centuries. Some starters were passed down through multiple generations of family bakers. The tangy flavor sourdough produced was considered superior to commercial yeast breads, and the longer fermentation made nutrients more available while improving digestibility. For elderly bakers living alone, maintaining starter provided both practical value and daily purpose. The routine of feeding and tending the culture gave structure to quiet days while ensuring fresh bread remained possible without trips to stores for expensive yeast packets. Rendered lard production turned pork fat trimmings into versatile cooking fat that outperformed expensive store-bought shortenings for pastry and frying. Elderly cooks saved fat scraps from bacon, pork chops, and roasts until enough accumulated for rendering, slowly melting the fat, straining out solids, and storing the clean white lard in crocks. This homemade lard produced flakier pie crusts, crispier fried foods, and richer flavored vegetables than any commercial product could match. For seniors who remembered when lard was standard kitchen equipment, the modern shift to vegetable shortenings seemed wasteful and unnecessary. The rendering process also produced cracklings, crispy bits of rendered fat that added flavor to cornbread, beans, and salads. Nothing from the pig was wasted, and the resulting lard lasted months without refrigeration when stored properly, providing seniors with self-sufficient cooking fat year-round. Jar meal planning allowed elderly cooks to prepare multiple single servings simultaneously, reducing both cooking frequency and fuel consumption significantly throughout the week. Ingredients for individual meals were layered in wide-mouth canning jars, rice or grains at the bottom, chopped vegetables in the middle, seasoned meat or beans on top, then sealed tightly and stored until needed. When hunger struck, seniors simply added water or broth, heated the jar contents in a pot of simmering water, and dinner was ready without extensive preparation or cleanup. This technique particularly suited elderly widows and widowers who found cooking for one person discouraging after years of feeding families. The jars represented visible meal security lined up in pantries, eliminating daily decisions about what to cook. The method also reduced food waste since ingredients were portioned precisely rather than spoiling in larger packages opened only for single meals. Root cellar rotation systems kept vegetables fresh for months without electricity, following strict organizational rules that ensured nothing spoiled before being eaten. Elderly gardeners placed newly harvested produce at the back of storage bins while moving older items forward, creating natural first-in, first-out inventory management. Different vegetables required different conditions. Potatoes needed darkness, carrots preferred sand burial, apples released gases that spoiled other produce, and seniors memorized these requirements through decades of practice. The root cellar represented food security that didn't depend on functioning refrigerators or uninterrupted electricity. For seniors living in rural areas where power outages were common, this independence mattered enormously. The cool, dark spaces beneath farmhouses held entire winters' worth of nutrition, carefully organized by someone who understood that survival required system and attention to detail. Tea towel bread proofing created perfect rising environments for dough without requiring warm ovens or heating fuel. Elderly bakers would cover shaped loaves with damp tea towels, then place them near sunny windows, on top of warm stoves, or even inside beds while linens retained body heat from sleeping. The towels prevented drying while trapping enough warmth for yeast to work steadily. This technique required understanding how yeast behaved at different temperatures and adjusting placement throughout seasons. Summer doughs rose quickly near windows, while winter batches needed spots closer to wood stoves or radiators. For seniors who baked bread weekly, mastering these placement decisions meant consistent results without wasting fuel on warming ovens for proofing. The method connected them to generations of bakers who worked without thermometers or controlled environments, relying instead on touch, timing, and accumulated wisdom. Meal stretching with dumplings turned thin soups and small portions of stew into filling dinners that satisfied hunger completely. Elderly cooks dropped simple flour and water dumplings into bubbling pots during the final cooking minutes, where they puffed into substantial additions that absorbed surrounding flavors while adding bulk. The dumplings required only basic pantry staples: flour, salt, perhaps a bit of fat or egg, yet transformed inadequate portions into complete meals. For seniors whose appetites had diminished but who still needed nutrition, dumplings provided carbohydrates and satisfaction without requiring large meat portions. The technique was infinitely adaptable, with dumplings appearing in chicken broths, vegetable stews, bean pots, and fruit compotes, depending on what the meal required. This simple addition represented the kind of flexible, practical cooking wisdom that modern, convenience-focused kitchens have abandoned entirely. Pressure canner batch processing allowed elderly gardeners to preserve entire harvests efficiently, transforming summer abundance into year-round food security. When green beans, tomatoes, or corn ripened simultaneously, seniors would spend concentrated days processing everything at once rather than attempting small batches that wasted fuel heating canners repeatedly. The heavy pressure canners required significant initial investment, but lasted decades, paying for themselves many times over through preserved foods that eliminated winter grocery costs. For seniors living alone, canning sessions often became social events with neighbors helping each other process harvests in exchange for shares of the preserved goods. The filled jars lining basement shelves represented visible wealth, months of meals that required no refrigeration, no shopping trips, and no dependence on stores that might be distant or inaccessible during harsh weather. Vinegar preservation methods extended the life of vegetables, fruits, and even meats without requiring expensive canning equipment or any form of refrigeration that might strain limited electrical budgets for seniors. Elderly cooks kept stoneware crocks of vinegar brine ready to receive garden surplus. Cucumbers became pickles, beets turned into tangy side dishes, and even tough cuts of meat were tenderized and preserved in vinegar solutions that added flavor while preventing bacterial spoilage. The acid environment prevented growth while adding brightness that made simple ingredients taste intentional rather than desperate. For seniors living alone, small batches of vinegar preserves meant fresh-tasting vegetables throughout winter without demanding work of pressure canning. The technique required only vinegar, salt, and whatever spices the pantry held. Pickled items lasted months in cool cellars, providing both nutrition and variety when fresh produce was unavailable or simply too expensive. Cast iron seasoning cycles maintained cookware that could last multiple lifetimes while providing essential dietary iron to elderly cooks who might otherwise develop nutritional deficiencies from limited diets. After each use, seniors wiped their cast iron with thin layers of bacon grease or lard, then heated the pans to polymerize the oil into a smooth, non-stick surface that actually improved with every meal cooked in it. This seasoning process meant never buying expensive non-stick cookware from stores and never worrying about chemical coatings degrading into food over time. For seniors who inherited cast iron from mothers and grandmothers, the pans represented tangible connection to family cooking traditions stretching back generations. The iron that leached into acidic foods provided nutritional benefits particularly important for elderly women prone to anemia. Properly seasoned cast iron required no soap, making cleanup easier for seniors with limited hand mobility. Milk souring for baking transformed dairy that had passed its prime into valuable leavening and tenderizing agents rather than waste destined for the drain or garbage pail outside. When milk soured naturally in kitchens without reliable refrigeration, elderly bakers saved it for biscuits, pancakes, and quick breads where the acid reacted with baking soda to create the lift that made baked goods rise beautifully and taste tender. Soured milk also tenderized baked goods and added subtle tanginess that fresh milk simply couldn't provide, no matter how carefully measured into recipes. For seniors living alone, milk often soured before single-person households could finish entire bottles, making this technique particularly valuable for avoiding waste. The practice required understanding how fermentation worked and recognizing the difference between safely soured milk and genuinely spoiled dairy that could cause illness. Elderly cooks learned these crucial distinctions through decades of experience. Bone meal fertilizer, grinding turned chicken, pork, and beef bones into valuable garden amendments that cost nothing while providing the phosphorus and calcium that plants desperately needed for strong root growth and abundant fruit production. After making stock that extracted every bit of flavor and nutrition, seniors dried the softened bones completely in warm ovens, then crushed them with hammers or ground them in hand-cranked mills into coarse powder suitable for garden use. This homemade bone meal was worked carefully into garden soil around tomatoes, peppers, and root vegetables, providing slow-release nutrients throughout entire growing seasons. For elderly gardeners who ate meat regularly, the bones accumulated steadily enough to eliminate fertilizer purchases entirely. The grinding process required patience and physical effort, but seniors found the work satisfying. Transforming dinner scraps into next season's harvests created visible connections between daily meals and summer gardens. Cooling rack dehydration preserved fruits, vegetables, and herbs using only natural air circulation and patient time, requiring no special equipment purchase or fuel expenditure whatsoever to accomplish. Elderly cooks sliced produce thin, arranged pieces carefully on wire cooling racks normally used for baked goods and placed them in warm spots, near wood stoves, in sunny windows, or in attics where summer heat concentrated naturally without any cost. The circulating air removed moisture gradually, creating shelf-stable foods that lasted months without refrigeration. Apple slices became chewy snacks children loved. Tomatoes transformed into concentrated flavor bombs for winter stews. Herbs dried for year-round seasoning. For seniors living alone, dehydration processed small harvests perfectly without large batch canning requirements. The resulting foods weighed almost nothing, stored easily in jars, and rehydrated into dishes that tasted remarkably fresh despite months of pantry storage. Leftover breadcrumb systems turned stale bread into versatile coating, binding, and extending ingredients that appeared in dozens of different dishes throughout each week in elderly households where nothing edible was wasted. Seniors dried bread pieces completely on warming oven tops or sunny windowsills, then crushed them into fine crumbs stored in glass jars or metal tins that protected against moisture and pantry pests. These accumulated crumbs coated fried foods with satisfying golden crunch, bound meatloaves and patties together firmly, topped casseroles for crispy finishes, and thickened soups when stirred in during final cooking minutes. For seniors living alone, bread went stale much faster than single servings could consume it, making crumb systems essential for preventing waste representing lost grocery money. The dried crumbs lasted indefinitely when stored properly in cool, dry pantries, accumulating steadily until enough existed for whatever recipe required them that week. Eggshell seed starting gave elderly gardeners completely free biodegradable containers for transplants that provided calcium directly to young plant roots while eliminating any need for purchased peat pots or plastic starting trays from expensive garden stores. After cracking eggs carefully to preserve shell halves as intact as possible, seniors rinsed them thoroughly to remove residue, poked small drainage holes in the bottoms using needles or pins, and filled them with seed-starting soil for growing transplants indoors during late winter months. When warm spring weather finally arrived, the entire shell went directly into garden soil, where it decomposed gradually throughout the growing season, releasing calcium that prevented blossom end rot in tomatoes and strengthened cell walls in pepper plants. For seniors who ate eggs regularly as affordable protein, the shells accumulated steadily enough to start entire vegetable gardens without any commercial container purchases. Butter wrapper saving collected the thin waxed paper that lined commercial butter sticks, preserving the residual fat clinging to each wrapper for greasing baking pans without using any additional butter from precious supplies that cost hard-earned money to replace. Elderly cooks folded used wrappers carefully and stored them in dedicated containers in refrigerators or cool pantries, pulling one wrapper out whenever recipes required greased baking dishes, cake pans, loaf pans, or cookie sheets. The small amount of butter remaining on each wrapper was exactly enough for most greasing needs, completely eliminating the wasteful practice of using fresh butter for this purpose. For seniors on fixed incomes who counted every tablespoon of expensive butter carefully, this simple technique provided completely free pan greasing for months of baking projects. The wrappers also worked beautifully for wrapping sandwiches to keep them fresh, covering rising bread dough to prevent surface drying, and separating frozen items. Onion skin dye batches transformed kitchen scraps that would otherwise fill garbage cans into beautiful natural coloring for Easter eggs, fabric projects, and homemade crafts without purchasing expensive commercial dyes from stores. Elderly cooks saved papery brown and red onion skins throughout the entire year, storing them in paper bags hung in dry pantry corners until enough accumulated for spring dyeing projects when grandchildren visited. When simmered slowly in water for an hour or longer, the skins released rich, golden brown and rust-colored pigments that colored Easter eggs beautifully and dyed cotton fabrics in warm earth tones perfect for quilting and craft projects. For seniors who remembered when commercial dyes were expensive luxuries completely unavailable in rural areas, onion skin dyeing represented cherished self-sufficiency and connection to traditions predating industrial chemistry. Children and grandchildren often participated eagerly in these Easter egg dyeing sessions. Weekly cooking day batching concentrated food preparation into single intensive sessions that reduced fuel consumption dramatically, simplified daily meal decisions completely, and ensured seniors living alone always had ready meals available whenever hunger struck or energy flagged. One designated day each week, typically Monday or Saturday depending on family traditions, elderly cooks prepared multiple dishes simultaneously. Large pots of beans simmered on back burners while bread baked in ovens, stocks reduced on front burners while vegetables were chopped and portioned for the entire week ahead. This batching approach used oven and stovetop heat with maximum efficiency rather than firing up appliances multiple times daily for individual small meals that wasted fuel. The prepared foods were portioned carefully into single servings, stored in cool pantries, ice boxes, or root cellars, and reheated throughout the week. For seniors with limited energy, having ready meals eliminated daily cooking burdens entirely. Adding generous amounts of butter or bacon fat to vegetables was considered nutritional sabotage during the low-fat obsession emerging in the 1960s. Health experts insisted vegetables should be steamed plain or eaten raw to maximize their benefits. Research now confirms that fat-soluble vitamins A, D, E, and K require dietary fat for proper absorption, meaning naked vegetables deliver far less nutrition than those prepared with traditional fats. Carotenoids in carrots, lycopene in tomatoes, and other crucial compounds pass through the digestive system largely unutilized without accompanying fat. Grandmothers who fried green beans in bacon drippings or sautéed spinach in butter weren't ruining healthy food. They were dramatically increasing its nutritional availability. The practice also made vegetables palatable enough that children actually ate them willingly. Science now recommends exactly what common sense already knew. Some fat makes everything about vegetables work better. Pot liquor was never discarded in a hillbilly kitchen because Grandma understood that the murky liquid left after boiling greens contained more nutrition than the vegetables themselves. When collards, turnip greens, or wild poke salad simmered for hours with a ham hock or fatback, the cooking water absorbed vitamins, minerals, and rich pork flavor. Rather than pouring this treasure down the drain, families saved pot liquor for drinking straight from cups, for soaking cornbread, or for soup and gravy bases. Elders believed it cured everything from winter colds to weak constitutions. The iron and vitamins helped prevent deficiencies common in communities with limited food variety. Children learned to love the salty taste, dunking cornbread until it softened into something between soup and porridge. Some families kept liquor warming on the stove for days, adding fresh water and vegetables as needed. This humble byproduct represented the mountain philosophy of waste nothing and nourish everyone. Cooking on the shovel blade was frontier ingenuity at its most practical when families lacked proper cookware or needed quick meals away from the kitchen hearth. A flat-bladed shovel, cleaned thoroughly and heated over open flames, became an instant griddle for frying eggs, toasting bread, or cooking small portions of meat. Field workers carried shovels anyway, making them dual-purpose tools that fed hungry workers during long days away from home. The metal heated evenly when held at the right angle over flames, and the long handle kept hands safe from the fire. Fathers showed sons how to judge temperature by watching metal change color and feeling heat radiating upward. Food cooked directly on the blade picked up a faint mineral taste that became associated with outdoor work and simple satisfaction. This technique required no additional equipment and worked anywhere a fire could be built, making it invaluable for remote work. Rendering and cooking with lard was standard practice in the 1960s kitchens before vegetable shortening and seed oils dominated grocery shelves. Health authorities warned families that animal fats would clog arteries, pushing them toward hydrogenated alternatives that seemed modern and clean. Decades later, scientists discovered those replacement products contained trans fats far more dangerous than anything in traditional lard. Pure lard from pastured pigs contains oleic acid, the same heart-healthy monounsaturated fat praised in olive oil, along with vitamin D that plant oils cannot provide. The smoke point proved higher than most vegetable oils, making it safer for high-heat frying without creating harmful compounds. Pie crusts made with lard achieved flakiness that shortening never matched. The generation that abandoned their grandmother's lard bucket for Crisco cans traded genuine nutrition for industrial convenience that science now regrets promoting. Cast iron seasoning was sacred knowledge passed from mother to daughter, determining whether a woman could properly keep house and feed her family. Grandma's skillets had been seasoned for decades, their surfaces black and glossy from countless layers of lard rubbed in and baked on until naturally non-stick. New brides received cast iron as wedding gifts along with strict instructions. Never use soap, never let water sit, always wipe with grease after washing. The seasoning process was ritualistic. Coat the pan with lard, bake it upside down for hours, let it cool completely, repeat until the surface gleamed. A properly seasoned skillet could fry eggs that slid like they were on ice, could sear cornbread with a perfect crust, could last through generations of daily use. Some families had skillets tracing back to great-grandmothers, the accumulated seasoning containing decades of family meals. Losing that seasoning through careless cleaning was considered a tragedy. Using vinegar to tenderize meat was how mountain families transformed tough cuts into something approaching luxury without spending money they did not have available. A few splashes of apple cider vinegar added to the marinade broke down tough muscle fibers in wild game and older livestock that would otherwise require hours of cooking. Families made their own vinegar from apple scraps, so the ingredient cost nothing beyond initial effort. The acid worked slowly overnight, penetrating deep into meat while adding subtle tanginess that complemented strong flavors of venison, squirrel, and tough old roosters. Women learned exact proportions through generations of practice, knowing how much was enough to tenderize without making meat mushy. The marinated meat could then be fried, roasted, or stewed with significantly shorter cooking times. This trick made poor cuts taste like quality and stretched limited protein into satisfying meals. Drinking whole milk and eating full-fat dairy products was common practice before low-fat recommendations transformed the dairy case into a parade of skim and reduced-fat options. Parents were told that removing fat would make dairy healthier for growing children and weight-conscious adults. Decades of research now show that full-fat dairy consumers have lower rates of obesity, diabetes, and heart disease compared to those choosing reduced-fat alternatives. The natural fats in whole milk slow sugar absorption, provide fat-soluble vitamins in bioavailable forms, and signal satiety that prevents overeating. Removing fat concentrated the lactose sugar while eliminating the components that made dairy genuinely nourishing. Children raised on whole milk from the family cow or local dairy received complete nutrition that skim milk simply cannot provide. The fat phobia that transformed American dairy consumption may have contributed to the very health problems it claimed to prevent. Pressure canning summer vegetables was the difference between eating well through winter and going hungry when snow covered mountain gardens. Grandma spent late summer surrounded by mason jars, boiling kettles, and bushels of tomatoes, green beans, corn, and whatever else the garden produced. The pressure canner hissed on the wood stove while children helped wash vegetables and pack jars, learning skills they would carry into their own households. Each sealed jar represented security, food that would last through lean months when nothing fresh grew and money for store-bought goods didn't exist. Root cellars filled with rows of jewel-toned jars, ruby tomatoes, golden corn, emerald green beans, purple beets. The work was exhausting and hot, lasting from dawn until dark for weeks. But when January winds howled and snow drifted against cabin walls, families opened those jars and tasted summer. Every bite reminded them that hard work during plenty created comfort during scarcity. Soaking beans with baking soda was a trick that solved two problems at once in mountain kitchens where fuel was precious and time was always scarce for busy families. A pinch of baking soda added to soaking water softened dried beans faster by breaking down their tough outer skins, reducing cooking time by hours. For families burning wood, they had chopped themselves. Shorter cooking times meant real savings in labor and resources. The alkaline water also neutralized compounds that caused digestive discomfort, making beans easier on stomachs. Women learned exact amounts through trial and error, knowing too much soda left a soapy taste while too little made no difference. The beans soaked overnight in crocks near the warm stove, absorbing water and releasing starches. By morning, they were plump and ready, cooking to creamy softness in half the usual time. This knowledge passed quietly between neighbors as practical wisdom that made survival easier. Eating liver, kidneys, and other organ meats weekly was routine in the 1960s households, before factory farming and supermarket convenience made such foods seem primitive. Muscle meats became the only acceptable protein while organs were relegated to pet food. Nutritional science now recognizes organ meats as the most nutrient-dense foods available, containing concentrated vitamins and minerals that muscle tissue cannot provide. Liver alone delivers more vitamin A, B12, folate, copper, and iron per ounce than any other food, supporting energy production and preventing deficiencies affecting millions today. Heart provides CoQ10 essential for cellular energy. Kidneys offer selenium and B vitamins in exceptional quantities. The generation that regularly consumed these foods experienced fewer deficiency-related health problems, despite having less access to supplements. What seemed like poverty eating was actually nutritional abundance that affluence foolishly abandoned. Stretching coffee with chicory root or roasted barley was how mountain families kept their morning ritual alive when real coffee was too expensive or unavailable at country stores. Grandma would dig chicory roots from roadsides, scrub them clean, slice them thin, and roast them slowly until dark brown and brittle. Ground fine and mixed with whatever coffee the family could afford, chicory added body and a slightly bitter earthiness that many people actually preferred. Some families roasted barley, rye, or dried corn kernels as coffee stretchers, creating blends so familiar children grew up thinking that was how coffee tasted. During the Depression and war years, these substitutes sometimes replaced coffee entirely, yet families gathered around kitchen tables just the same, warming hands on mugs filled with dark, steaming liquid. The practice taught that ritual and togetherness mattered more than expensive ingredients and that resourcefulness preserved normalcy during hard times. Greasing cast iron with fatback was the secret behind every properly seasoned skillet in rural Appalachian kitchens across the mountain south. Fatback, the thick layer of fat from a hog's back, was rubbed across cast iron cookware while still warm, creating a protective coating that prevented rust and built the non-stick surface that made mountain cooking possible. Women saved every scrap specifically for this purpose, keeping pieces wrapped in cloth near the stove where they stayed soft and ready to use. The process was repeated after every use, building layers of seasoning that turned cheap cast iron into family heirlooms passed through generations. A well-seasoned skillet required no additional oil for frying and released food effortlessly. Children learned this ritual by watching mothers perform it hundreds of times before being trusted with precious cookware. This simple trick transformed basic equipment into tools that lasted lifetimes and cooked food with unmatched quality. Cooking in cast iron skillets was once dismissed as outdated by cookware manufacturers pushing aluminum and Teflon alternatives during the 1960s. Families who clung to their grandmother's heavy black pans were told they were living in the past. Yet scientists now confirm that cast iron cooking increases dietary iron intake significantly, particularly when preparing acidic foods like tomatoes. The iron leaches into food in forms the body can absorb, providing natural supplementation no pill can match. Women and children benefited most from this unintentional fortification, preventing anemia in households that couldn't afford expensive red meat. The seasoning that built up over decades created a natural non-stick surface without synthetic chemicals that later proved concerning. Those black skillets passed through generations weren't just sentimental keepsakes. They delivered measurable health benefits that took science 50 years to recognize and validate. Lye soap making from wood ashes and rendered fat was a skill every mountain woman possessed, producing harsh but effective cleanser for families and households. Grandma collected hardwood ashes from the fireplace throughout winter, storing them in barrels until spring soap making time. Water poured through the ashes leached out lye, the caustic liquid dripping into buckets below. This homemade lye was combined with saved cooking fats and boiled together in large kettles outdoors. The mixture transformed through saponification into thick brown soap poured into wooden molds to harden. The resulting bars cleaned anything from greasy skillets to dirty overalls, though they were rough on skin. Some grandmas added herbs to soften harshness. The process required careful attention since lye could cause serious burns if handled carelessly. This self-sufficiency meant families never worried about running out of soap regardless of money or store access. Wrapping food in wet newspaper before burying it in coals was a technique that created steam cooking without any equipment at all beyond what most families had available. The dampened paper protected food from direct contact with ash, while moisture trapped inside created pressure that cooked fish and vegetables evenly throughout. Mountain families learned this from Native American traditions and adapted it to their own needs, using whatever paper was available from rare newspapers to catalog pages. The paper charred on the outside while food inside steamed to perfection, emerging clean and thoroughly cooked. Timing was crucial because too long meant paper burned through while too short left food underdone. Experienced cooks developed instinct for judging coals and thickness. The technique worked especially well for delicate fish that fell apart when fried, keeping flesh intact while infusing subtle smoke flavor. Children watched this magic happen at fish fries. Home fermentation of vegetables was actively discouraged by food safety authorities during the 1960s, who warned families about botulism from homemade pickles and sauerkraut. Store-bought versions pasteurized with vinegar seemed safer and more reliable. Scientists now understand that traditional lactofermentation creates conditions where beneficial bacteria thrive while harmful pathogens cannot survive, producing probiotics that support immune function and digestive health in ways pasteurized products never can. The process preserved vegetables through winter while actually increasing their nutritional value, creating vitamins absent from fresh produce. Fermented foods populated the gut with diverse microorganisms now recognized as essential for mental health and weight regulation. Families who maintained crocks of fermenting cabbage weren't risking their health. They were cultivating living foods that modern probiotic supplements attempt to replicate at far greater expense. Lard rendering day was a major event following every hog butchering, when families transformed pounds of raw pig fat into the cooking staple that would carry them through the entire year. Grandma cut leaf fat and back fat into small cubes, placing them in huge iron kettles over outdoor fires that burned low and slow for hours. As fat melted, she stirred constantly with long wooden paddles, watching for the moment cracklings turned golden and floated to the surface. The liquid lard was strained through cloth into containers where it cooled into pure white blocks, perfect for pie crusts, biscuits, frying, and any cooking requiring fat. Nothing matched the flaky tenderness that properly rendered lard gave to baked goods. Leftover cracklings were seasoned with salt and eaten as snacks or crumbled into cornbread for extra richness. Families stored lard in crocks in the root cellar, where cool temperatures kept it fresh for months. This single process provided essential cooking fat all year. Burying potatoes in ash was one of the oldest cooking methods mountain families used before electric ovens existed in rural Appalachian communities. Fresh potatoes were nestled directly into warm ashes at the edge of a fireplace, covered completely until only coals surrounded them on all sides. The ash acted as insulation, slowly roasting potatoes over several hours until skins turned papery and insides became fluffy and sweet. Families learned exactly how deep to bury them through years of practice passed from grandmother to granddaughter. The technique required no pots, no pans, and no fuel beyond what was already heating the home. Children were sent to check potatoes by poking them with sticks, learning doneness through texture rather than timers. The finished potatoes emerged with subtle smokiness no modern oven could replicate. This method fed families through winters when other cooking options were limited and fuel was precious. Simmering bones for hours to make rich broth seemed wasteful to efficiency-minded 1960s homemakers being sold canned alternatives. Campbell's and other manufacturers promised convenience while dismissing homemade stock as unnecessary labor. Modern nutrition research has vindicated the old ways, revealing that bone broth delivers collagen, glycine, and minerals in bioavailable forms that support gut health, joint function, and skin elasticity. The gelatin released during long simmering creates protein structures that help heal intestinal lining damaged by processed foods. Glucosamine extracted naturally from cartilage provides joint support without expensive supplements. Grandmothers who refused to throw away chicken carcasses or beef bones weren't being cheap. They were practicing nutritional wisdom that pharmaceutical companies now bottle and sell for premium prices. The stockpot simmering on the back burner represented genuine wealth that no convenience product could replicate. Apple scrap vinegar production turned kitchen waste into a valuable pantry staple, that served dozens of purposes throughout the year. When Grandma peeled apples for pies or sauce, she saved every core and peeling in a crock covered with water and cloth. Over weeks, wild yeasts fermented the sugars into alcohol. Then bacteria transformed that alcohol into sharp, tangy vinegar. The process required patience, knowing when to stir, when to skim, when the vinegar was strong enough for use. The finished product preserved pickles, cleaned kitchen surfaces, dressed salads, and served as medicine for sore throats and digestive troubles. Some families kept mother of vinegar, the gelatinous culture that accelerated fermentation, passing it down through generations like sourdough starter. Making vinegar from scraps that would otherwise feed pigs demonstrated the mountain philosophy that nothing useful should ever be discarded. Every apple entering the kitchen gave twice, first as food, then as preservation tool. Storing eggs in water glass was the preservation method that kept mountain families supplied through winter months when hens stopped laying entirely and eggs became scarce. Water glass, a solution of sodium silicate and water, sealed eggshells by filling their tiny pores and preventing air and bacteria from entering. Fresh eggs were carefully lowered into crocks filled with the solution, where they remained edible for 6 months or longer without refrigeration. Families gathered eggs during peak laying season and preserved dozens at a time, ensuring protein through lean months. The technique required clean eggs with intact shells, so women handled each one carefully, rejecting any with cracks that might introduce contamination. Eggs preserved this way cooked normally, though they sometimes produced flatter whites, which mattered little when food security was the priority. The crocks were stored in cool cellars where temperatures stayed stable. Saving and reusing bacon grease in ceramic crocks beside the stove was standard kitchen practice that modernization nearly eliminated. Food writers and health advocates condemned the habit as unsanitary and unhealthy, promoting spray oils and margarine as cleaner alternatives. Bacon fat contains roughly 40% saturated fat, but also 45% monounsaturated oleic acid, the same compound that gives olive oil its health halo. The rendered fat proved remarkably stable, resisting oxidation that makes polyunsaturated vegetable oils go rancid and potentially harmful. Using bacon grease for frying eggs, seasoning beans, or starting gravies added depth of flavor no industrial product could match. The practice eliminated waste, stretched food budgets, and delivered genuine taste that made simple meals memorable. Families who never threw away bacon drippings were practicing sustainable cooking that modern chefs now celebrate. Stale bread transformation was an art form in mountain kitchens where throwing away food was considered sinful. Grandma never discarded hardened loaves or dried-out biscuits. Instead, she saw raw materials for entirely new dishes. Stale bread became bread pudding when combined with eggs, milk, sugar, and whatever spices were available, baked golden and served warm with cream. Dried biscuits were crushed into crumbs for coating fried foods or stretching meatloaf, adding texture while reducing expensive ground meat. Old cornbread was crumbled into buttermilk for quick breakfast or mixed with onions and sage for holiday dressing. Some grandmas dried bread completely, storing it in cloth bags for months. The practice extended to every baked good. Stale cake became trifle, old pie crust became soup crackers. Children grew up understanding that freshness was temporary, but usefulness was permanent, that every ingredient deserved multiple lives before finally feeding the chickens or pigs. Making gravy from pan drippings was the technique that turned every meat dish into 2 meals and wasted nothing in kitchens where every calorie counted towards survival. After frying or roasting meat, the browned bits and rendered fat left in the pan became foundation for rich gravies that stretched protein into something more filling. Flour was sprinkled directly into hot fat and stirred constantly until it formed a paste that cooked to golden brown, developing deep, nutty flavors. Milk, water, or broth was added slowly while stirring to prevent lumps, creating smooth gravy that captured every bit of flavor from the original meat. Children learned to make gravy by standing beside mothers at the stove, learning exact motions and timing that defined good cooking. The gravy was poured over biscuits, potatoes, and cornbread, making small amounts of meat feed large families. Nothing was scraped into garbage when this knowledge lived in households. Heavy salting of meat for preservation was abandoned when refrigeration became universal, and health authorities began warning about sodium consumption. The practice seemed unnecessary when freezers could preserve food indefinitely without additives. Yet salt curing did far more than prevent spoilage. It created beneficial compounds, developed complex flavors, and improved the nutritional profile of preserved meats in ways freezing never could. The curing process encouraged beneficial bacteria while inhibiting pathogens, creating fermented products with probiotic potential. Salt-preserved meats developed concentrated flavors requiring smaller portions to satisfy, potentially reducing overall consumption. Traditional hams and bacons prepared with proper salt curing contained enzymes and compounds that modern quick-cured versions lack entirely. The craft of salt preservation represented accumulated wisdom about food chemistry that industrial shortcuts eliminated while claiming improvement. Sour milk baking was a technique that transformed what modern families would consider spoiled dairy into the secret ingredient for the fluffiest biscuits and most tender cakes. Before refrigeration, milk clabbered naturally within days, thickening and developing a tangy flavor similar to buttermilk. Rather than viewing this as waste, Grandma embraced clabbered milk as a superior baking ingredient. The natural acids reacted with baking soda to create extra lift, producing biscuits that rose high and light, pancakes that stayed fluffy, and cakes with remarkable tenderness. Children learned to smell milk before pouring. Slightly sour meant perfect for baking. Truly spoiled went to the pigs. Some grandmas intentionally set milk aside in warm spots to encourage clabbering. The practice required understanding the difference between safely soured and dangerously spoiled, knowledge passed through observation and experience. When refrigeration became common, this skill faded, and with it the particular taste that clabbered milk provided. Fermenting foods without commercial starters or precise temperature control seemed reckless to food scientists promoting standardized production during the 1960s. Wild fermentation relied on naturally occurring bacteria and yeasts that authorities viewed as unpredictable and dangerous. Traditional fermenters understood that proper salt concentration, anaerobic conditions, and patience created environments where beneficial organisms outcompeted harmful ones without external intervention. The resulting diversity of probiotic strains far exceeded anything commercial starters could provide, creating products with complex flavors and genuine health benefits. Sourdough bread made from wild-captured yeasts offered superior nutrition compared to commercial yeast versions. Naturally fermented pickles and sauerkraut contained living cultures that pasteurized products couldn't match. The wisdom embedded in traditional fermentation practices predated scientific understanding but achieved what laboratory methods later struggled to replicate. Water-glass egg preservation allowed mountain families to store fresh eggs for months without refrigeration, ensuring protein through winter when hens stopped laying. Grandma dissolved sodium silicate in water to create a thick gel-like solution in large crocks. Fresh eggs, gathered the same day and never washed to preserve their natural coating, were gently lowered into the mixture until submerged. The solution sealed porous shells, preventing air and bacteria from entering while keeping moisture inside. Properly stored eggs lasted 6 months or longer in cool root cellars, tasting nearly as fresh as when laid. Families packed dozens of eggs in late summer when hens produced abundantly, creating reserves for winter baking. The practice required careful selection. Only perfect, uncracked eggs would keep. Children learned to handle eggs gently, understanding each one represented future meals. When refrigeration arrived, water glass faded from kitchens, taking with it generations of preservation knowledge. Eating eggs daily was condemned by health authorities who believed dietary cholesterol directly caused heart disease. The American Heart Association warned families to limit eggs to 3 per week, treating them as dangerous indulgences rather than nutritional powerhouses. Modern research has completely reversed this position, finding no connection between egg consumption and cardiovascular risk in healthy individuals. The cholesterol in eggs actually helps the body produce hormones, build cell membranes, and synthesize vitamin D. Eggs provide complete protein with all essential amino acids, plus choline critical for brain function that most Americans lack. The yolks contain lutein and zeaxanthin that protect aging eyes from macular degeneration. Farm families who ate eggs daily from their backyard flocks weren't shortening their lives. They were consuming one of nature's most perfect foods. The decades of egg restriction may have contributed to widespread choline deficiency, now linked to liver disease and cognitive decline. Root cellar organization was an exact science that determined whether vegetables lasted through winter or rotted within weeks. Grandma understood that different produce required different conditions. Some needed humidity while others demanded dry air. Some kept best in sand while others hung from rafters. Potatoes were stored in complete darkness to prevent greening, layered in wooden bins with straw between layers for air circulation. Apples were wrapped individually in newspaper and kept far from potatoes, since the gases they released would cause sprouting. Cabbages hung upside down from the ceiling by their roots, staying fresh for months in the cold, humid air. Carrots, turnips, and beets were buried in boxes of damp sand that kept them crisp without allowing rot. Onions and garlic hung in braided strings near the entrance where air moved freely. Grandma checked the cellar weekly, removing anything showing signs of spoilage before it could spread. This careful management meant families ate garden vegetables well into spring. Which of these forgotten cooking tricks would you bring back to your own kitchen? Drop your favorite in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe for more lost wisdom from generations past.